The location of Saint-Nazaire may well have been partly determined by the situation of an ancient site on the edge of the road, for example, a cemetery. The Gallo-Romans built their cemeteries outside of the cities, along the edge of roads, and sometimes at a considerable distance from settlements. The dead were effectively expelled from the realms of the living. The construction of the village of Saint-Nazaire at an unknown date during the Middle Ages marked the reintegration of the cemetery into the settlement. During this period, the notion of connection between the living and the dead was strong. For example, masses were said for the souls of the departed, providing a constant reminder of their presence. Through the church, the dead benefited from a form of continued existence, even before the bodily resurrection, which was expected to occur at the end of time. This revolution in the approach to death can be seen through archive documents. The cadastral plan shows the cemetery at the heart of the old village, the fort. It does not appear in the 1631 registers, but in presence can be deduced from the inventory of feudal dues, in which several houses no longer in existence are described as backing onto the cemetery on their south side. One house was almost entirely surrounded by the cemetery, which may have looked something like this. Following medieval and early modern usages, we would expect to find a cross at the centre of the site. Villages were buried simply, and only the very richest lay or clerical magnates had tombstones. Members of these elite were generally buried in the nave of the church, with proximity to the altar determined by rank. The area nearest the altar was considered to be the most sacred. The lords whose exercised power over Saint-Nazaire were buried in the most prestigious chapels at Caderousse or Grignon. Mere villagers, however, could only expect to be buried in the cemetery, without the added aura of sanctity conferred by the church buildings. A number of strategies were used in an attempt to reach heaven as quickly as possible, or to reduce one's time in purgatory. Preferred locations included the area around the central cross, or plots as close as possible to the church walls. The right to be buried in these locations was conferred by the priest, and the inhabitants might have attempted to curry favour by offering financial support. Particularly pious individuals might request the right to be buried at the entrance of the church, where they would be constantly trampled on by churchgoers in a show of profound humility. Death was a continual concern and the subject of numerous and complex fantasies, which rendered it less opaque than in modern times, where cremation rather than burial is becoming the norm. In many cases, our communities have followed the Roman pattern, building cemeteries outside of settlements, although in some cases the settlements have then extended out towards the cemeteries. This new wave of expulsion of the dead originated in the late 18th century with a change in sensibilities. The putrid odours of the cemetery and the sight of bones dug up by dogs were no longer welcome within the village, and inhabitants preferred not to have their boules game disturbed by burials. Whilst the notion of playing pétanque in a cemetery may seem bizarre by modern standards, the central location of burial grounds made them a prime meeting point for games, chat and even commerce, reflecting the pre-modern sense of continuity between life and death. In one neighbouring town, the Reville brothers, about whom nothing else is known, were even condemned to 8 days in prison for playing boules in a cemetery with freshly exhumed skulls.